What's up, you guys? Welcome to The Imagination. I'm your host, Emma, and today I am so honored to introduce you all to non-binary, queer, and polyfragmented cult torture, mind control, and incest survivor, overcomer, and whistleblower living with dissociative identity disorder, award-winning, published, and so passionate writer and author, writing the books they needed as a struggling teen and couldn't find, content creator, artist, and visionary, entrepreneur, educator, and the brightest and most colorful light in this dark world, Cheryl Rainfield. A little bit about Cheryl and what you guys can expect to hear about in today's episode. Born in Toronto and raised in what appeared on the outside to be an ordinary middle-class family, Cheryl endured horrors few can fathom. Intergenerational, organized cult torture involving ritual abuse, mind control, trafficking, torture, and relentless programming designed to break body, mind, and soul. Yet even as a child, Cheryl found cracks in the darkness. Writing and art became their first lifelines, silent workarounds that allowed truth to slip past the threats. Early on in teenage years, folks inside the personality system began sharing memories, starting with the easier incest memories. A school story written by one of those parts reached a teacher who believed. Police and Child Protective Services were called. It was a first fragile step towards light. But safety was not immediate. Cult-involved parents responded with a therapist who deliberately slowed healing. Torture intensified at night. Still, the system inside refused to stay silent. By age 15, Cheryl chose their own therapist, an extraordinary cult torture survivor with DID themselves, who instantly recognized the switching, the co-fronting, and the blending. That early validation became a cornerstone. Cheryl lives with a polyfragmented dissociative identity, a complex structure born of extreme calculated torture. Thousands of fragments form hubs, splits, and subgroups, some self-created for protection, others deliberately created by the cult. Escape was not one dramatic moment, but a marathon of courage. Slowly, layer by layer, Cheryl reached safety. It took most of their life, but they did it, proving that no matter how long the road, freedom can come. Through it all, writing was both a sanctuary and a superpower. Cheryl began as soon as they could hold a pencil, pouring pain onto pages when speech was forbidden. In their late 20s and early 30s, they honed their craft and became the author they needed as a teen. Their 6 books, Scars, with Cheryl's own scarred arm on the cover, Stained, Hunted, Visions, and more, draw deeply from their trauma and healing, yet remain powerful literary fiction. In Scars, a queer teen artist confronts sexual abuse and self-harm. In Stained, a girl fights for survival after abduction. Every protagonist is a survivor who saves themselves. But Cheryl's impact stretches far beyond the page, on social media, through articles on their website and blog, and in raw, compassionate videos and podcasts. They speak openly about cult torture, polyfragmented DID, mind control, and the path to healing. Today, Cheryl is more than a survivor. They are a warrior of the heart, a voice that refuses to be silenced, and living proof that the most broken places can birth the most beautiful light. Their books, their words, their very existence whisper to every struggling soul, healing is real, you can get safe, and you can find joy again. In a world still learning to believe, Cheryl stands tall, reminding us that the greatest act of defiance against evil is to live fully, to love fiercely, and to lift others towards the light they themselves fought so hard to reach. Cheryl did not just survive. They transformed pain into purpose, fragments into wholeness, and silence into a symphony of hope that echoes across the world. Their light continues to guide countless others home, to safety, to healing, and to themselves. And in that light, we all rise a little taller. So you guys, without further ado, please help me in welcoming today's guest of honor, voice for the voiceless, walking miracle, bold survivor advocate, introvert turned public speaker, passionate purveyor of truth, and an inspirational system who has transformed the very fragments of trauma that once shattered them into stories that save lives, voices that shatter silence, and a presence that reminds every survivor you are not alone, you can get safe, and healing is possible. The one, the only, Cheryl Rainfield. Cheryl, it is an honor to have you on today. Thank you so much for being here with us.
Thank you for having me. And that was the most beautiful and thorough introduction I've ever had.
And you're so worthy of it. It was hard to put experiences in your testimony into a short form. I felt like I could have written a whole book also just on what I know about you. So what you've done is just extraordinary since getting away from the cult that you grew up in, which we'll talk about today. And just the inspiration that you give others, the hope that you give others. I was so grateful when I found your account, I believe on TikTok. And I was so grateful that you were out here talking about some of these more taboo topics and educating on things that society has no idea exist. And I see the comments that you get, the people that engage with you. And I just want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for your courage to speak out and for all that you're doing for so many people.
Thank you. And thank you for making a place for so many survivors to speak out on and be heard.
It's an absolute
really matters.
It does. And I'm really thrilled to get to share your testimony today with my audience. Some may have heard of you, but one thing I wanted to start with, I thought one of the things that was really fascinating about your presence online is a lot of survivors talk about the experiences they go through and they categorize it more as ritual abuse, satanic ritual abuse, Ramkoa. And one thing that really stood out initially to me about you was you talk more about your experiences being labeled as cult torture. And so I wanted to just start and just get your feedback on that, on why you chose those specific words and phrases to use and kind of what they mean to you and the message that you hope to get across using that.
I used to say that I'm a ritual abuse survivor, but then I would sit there trying to explain to people what that meant. And I wanted people to understand that it's torture and that it's organized by cults. And so saying cult torture to me was a succinct way to say that and try and help people understand a little bit sooner, but also not watering it down. I feel like we're watering it down for other people's comfort when we say ritual abuse or organized abuse, because people don't want to hear torture. And they don't want to believe that torture and cult torture is happening in their own city, in their own country, but it is, and it's so prevalent, it's so common. And I want to kind of wake people up about it. I want people to understand how organized it is and how extreme it is. And I'm hoping that other survivors also feel validated in that, because it is our truth. It is torture, and it is by cults.
And I want to agree with you on that. When we were talking a little bit about when I first learned about all of this before we started recording, but one of the things that sort of struck me was I've heard the term human trafficking a lot, and it just kind of like went over my head. I just pushed it away before I really knew about it and thought, well, this happens other places. It's separate from me. And I had no idea what that entailed, just hearing the word trafficking. Of course, the word sounds bad, but I didn't believe that it involved torture. You know, there was just certain things that specific words, it doesn't give the reality of some of these situations. And so I completely agree with you. When I started learning about the deeper abuses and the more calculated and systematized abuses that happen, it shattered my world. But hearing the words human trafficking didn't necessarily break that in me. It was digging deeper and finding out what that word actually meant. And you're exactly right. It's not, just one layer of things. It goes really deep. And at the bottom of that barrel is torture, is heinous crime that happens against a child. And I think it is very important that we don't sugarcoat things and we speak about it in the vernacular that you are. And so I really appreciate that you do that, because it's important that people hear those words.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And so as we were saying, you are a cult torture survivor. And so I thought I'd ask about the cult that you grew up in, and if you know how far back it went in your family and how they got involved with that, if you know.
So the cults, it's multiple cults that my parents and entire extended family were a part of. They were intergenerational, interconnected, KKK, Nazi, satanic, and Christian cults, among others. And I know as far back as my great-grandparents, but I only know that because I remember like my great-grandmother being part of the torture. I can't know farther back because they weren't alive when I was alive, but I know it goes back at least that far. I have no idea when it started, but I know that it goes back centuries. Like all of the families, we are born into the cult. We don't choose it. They don't look for outside members. We're just born into it, tortured, and had mind control used against us from birth onward, and torture from birth onward. And that keeps us in a closed environment, even though it doesn't look like that to the outside world.
Did the specific cult environment that you grew up in, were there any type of belief systems that, say religious or otherwise, that were really strict in the household?
In the non-torture time, where they were trying to look like normal family members, it would have been Christian. So we went to a United Church every Sunday, and they tried to appear progressive, so they would have been voting that way, but torture and murder and trafficking of children is not progressive. But in the actual cult torture, satanic and Christianity, so Satanism and Christianity were used, as well as white supremacism, always racism, homophobia to an extreme, ableism, misogyny. That's the core of it all. And I'm not sure that the cults actually believed, that the members actually believed either Satanism or Christianity. I think that those were trappings used, especially the Satanism, to discredit us when we would talk and remember. I think they do believe, though, in like white supremacy and racism and homophobia and ableism and misogyny. But I don't think they actually believe in Satan. They just use the trappings of that to try and discredit us when we talk.
And you mentioned a good point about having this kind of cover life. Somebody could look on the outside like they're going to church, and then on the back end, they're hailing Satan, or practicing white supremacy and, having allegiance with Nazism and KKK. You hear about that a lot in these testimonies, these different, like you said, racism and things that you'd never see from somebody just going to church and sitting by them. And so I wanted to see, speaking of sort of that front part, what did your family appear like on the outside, and what was the vision that people had of them that lived in your community?
People would think that they were good people, good parents, caring. My mother, she volunteered, she baked cookies for the church and the school fairs. She sang in the choir. My father taught Sunday school every Sunday. They volunteered in the community. They were part of the plays. My mother took care of children in the neighborhood who had cult-involved parents, though, but after school, like she's taking care of them. They looked like good people. If you are not looking past the superficial level, if you're not looking at eyes, if you're not using your intuition or your gut, if you're not looking at how the words don't necessarily line up with the body language or with the emotion, because both of my parents were very cold and calculated and lacked compassion and empathy. But they looked like really good parents and people that most people would just see that. Oh, and they looked very over-concerned about me because I was showing so many signs of the trauma. So they would look like over-concerned parents, but they were really trying to make sure that they could control everywhere I went and everything that was said and done.
And you had mentioned multi-generationally, the cult torture and everything that comes with that was passed down for at least a few generations that you know about. And one thing you talk a lot about is not just DID, but polyfragmented DID. Do you want to talk a little bit about what that is so people can understand the rest of the context of the conversation that we're going to have? And even, if that was the type of dissociation that your parents also had?
So polyfragmented dissociative identity, I think there's a spectrum of dissociative identity, and polyfragmented would be on the far end. It is the most complicated, it is the most fragmented, And for me, it means there are thousands and thousands of fragments of parts that make up recognizable groups inside when they're fronting in the body or when I'm hearing them in my mind. But also there are really complicated structures set up. So there are, like, say, hundreds in one little subgroup. And then for each subgroup, let's say hopeful, happy kids, there would be pulling off from the main subgroup tons of other little subgroups, and each of them are connected. It's like their own little land or world inside. So it gets really complicated, but I didn't think it was complicated. But that's part of polyfragmentation. And I am sure that my parents, my grandparents, my great-grandparents were all also living with dissociative identity. I don't know if it was polyfragmented or not. Likely it was, but I could see them switch when I was a kid. I just didn't understand because I also lived with that and did not have words for it until I was 15.
And you mentioned this abuse began at birth. Could you talk about why it would happen at birth, and what did that look like for you?
I think it actually starts in utero. From what I witnessed from other pregnant women, I would see the cult do different forms of torture. So putting needles into the belly, using, I do not know what it's called, but screaming music, metal music, really, really like loudly, and putting it on the belly of the woman. And so I think that was to disconnect the child from the mother and the mother from the child, so that they would not bond. And because the cult wants the child to bond with the cult, they want the child to feel like the cult is their family, and that the cult is the one who will keep them safe, even though we're being tortured, and to not ever have the child try and escape or try and talk. So they want that bond created. So they usually, the cult creates an other mother or an other father. So some adult in the cult is paired with a child, where they will show them fake empathy and compassion and fake love, and then turn on the child. But all of it is to create bonding, trauma bonding. And they don't want the birth mother to be connected to the child because they want it to stay within the cult. So I think it would have started for me in utero based on what I saw, but also the cult forces all of us with a uterus to bear children for the cult that are unregistered. So that means those babies and then those children are grown up only within cult environments, like a warehouse or wherever, where many are kept. They don't go to school. They don't get out into society. They don't have documentation. They don't have like a full legal name. But when it starts early, it starts when we first have a period. So when the cult forced that for me, for us, they did the same thing. They were using the needles and in the belly, and also the screaming music and even electroshock to, I think, disconnect me and keep me from having that bond, which it did not do, but I think it would for a lot of women or assigned female at birth people. And then the torture happens at birth and onward. I think because the cult wants us to split and dissociate and start the creation of personalities. The cult wants, they need us to dissociate and to create personalities. One, because that's the only way to survive all the torture, but two, to control us, because they create cult-created personalities, and those personalities hold on to the programming, so the mind control, so specific steps to do. And there are very basic core programs that the cult gives us, like most of us cult torture survivors. So like, don't talk programming, don't remember, because they want us to function in the outside world in the non-torture time well enough. And it's very hard to do that if you're being tortured and you remember it all the time. So don't remember, don't talk, don't try to escape. But also, because splitting, creating personalities inside becomes standard, like it becomes how we survive the torture. We're always splitting off our own personalities and then during the torture to survive. And then the cult does not want our self-created personalities to be talking to or even aware of the cult-created personalities, because if we're aware of them, we're going to know what was happening. Like, because we dissociate the trauma, we forget the trauma in between to survive. But if we know what's happening and if we start talking to them, then we can remember who the abusers are and try and get safe. We can try and unravel the programming, work on the programming, which we absolutely can do. And again, that helps us get a step safer. And cult doesn't want that. They don't want to lose their victims because it's lucrative for them, right? They're gaining so much money from the organized child trafficking. And then even as teens and adults, they are gaining money from the child pornography. They are gaining money from the torture pornography, and also from selling our blood when we are like children, even teens. So the cult doesn't want to lose that, as well as I did see them getting off on it, being stimulated sexually, but also I think emotionally, they enjoyed it. So they don't want to lose any of that, as well as the power and the status and the favors that they get.
So horrific. I'm so sorry you had to go through all of that. Just thinking about that and then realizing that because of the dissociation, you're also at the same time have sort of this like normal-ish life where you're functioning as a normal child in society, and people just have no idea. Like you said, you would never know just by looking. And it makes me always wonder whenever I'm just out and about, even at the grocery store, walking around, I see a parent with a child, and like, I wish my first thought wasn't something like, gosh, I hope that child's safe at home, and you almost just want to like go pick up every kid and hug them. And so it's just so sad to hear that this starts so young. It's not acceptable at any age, but thinking about a little fetus, having to go through torture already, things that are going to traumatize them before they've even taken their first breath. It's just evil beyond comprehension, and so sad that so many are going through this. And so with that being said, I think another misconception, because of things like Hollywood, because the lack of information on organized abuse that is out there, I think a lot of people just assume that violence in a home is mostly random. A dad gets drunk and gets the belt out and hits a kid, or a mom spanks a kid because she's frustrated. Can you talk a little bit about organized abuse and what the grooming process looks like as a young child in order to get a child compliant and quiet and obviously dissociated as they're growing up, so there isn't breaks, and so the people outside in school and in society really do have no idea that this is happening?
Well, they build on the torture that they do, but I don't feel like I know for some survivors there was a grooming period, but for me, because the torture and the sexual assault started as a baby, like there's not an adjustment period. There's just survival. And the cult does intentionally create specific personalities for prostitution, for the child trafficking. So specific personalities are taught like jobs, very specific jobs. Like I have ones who would only know how to deal with S&M, and then ones who would be called out to be younger because that's what many of the people who rented us wanted. I have ones who only know how to deal with pain, torture during sexual assault. That was taught by repetition and mind control built on repeatedly doing that and calling them out and making sure that they knew that if that personality knew that if they did not submit and do that job specifically how they were taught, that someone else would die, like another child would be killed, or we would die, or we would be tortured more. So it was a lot of threats and mind control and building up on repeated torture and sexual assault over and over and over for each specific job that the cult asked or, well, demanded.
And where would this happen for you? Was this at home? Were you taken places for the organized abuse situations? I know you said you were trafficked, which is so horrific too, to think about you as a little child, not having anybody to keep you safe and passing you around to these perverts. But where did your abuse take place, and what types of environments and places were they taking you to facilitate this organized abuse?
It feels like everywhere. I did not have any safe place because at home there was torture and abuse. It just wasn't within a cult setting. There weren't like multiple adults perpetrating it, but I was sexually assaulted all the time at home by both parents and tortured. So I never knew when that would happen. And while I was generally safe at school, there was always a cult-involved teacher or a nurse or janitor, and some of them did sexually assault me at school. But the organized cult torture, so the rituals or the actual programming where there was torture, that could happen in graveyards. It could happen in church basements. It could happen in forest clearings in private land or in public land, but where they had it private sections, because this is in the middle of the night, that in like a forest clearing or an area that is pretty deserted, like there was some private land. It could happen in bunkers, basements, buildings where people would think there would be good things happening, like churches, yes, but also, let's say, volunteer organizations. I'm not really wanting to name some of them, but volunteer organizations where they're saying that they are do-gooders. It would happen there as well. For the trafficking, we could be taken to the businesses. We could be taken to private homes if they're rich people. We were also sexually assaulted and tortured on private airplanes. But it could also happen in warehouses where they had stalls. To me, it was stalls. They're narrowish rooms that they built, and there's so many of us in a row. But the stalls were made up to look like children's bedrooms. So with like a child's bedspread and a teddy bear and some toys out, because that was appealing to the people who were renting us. And then for the child pornography, again, it could be in the stalls, but it could be in members' homes. It could be they made studios, but it would be within a warehouse. And then also the very organized torture when they were doing the mind control, that was often in warehouses, or I don't know, it looked like an office building, but I think they owned the entire building. But there was military involvement and there was scientist involvement. And so the rooms are stark, and unless they were setting it up for a specific abuse scenario where they're using props and costumes, like when they would do fake surgeries, where they would try and pretend that they were putting a bomb in our belly or a microchip in our brain to control us. And it looked like an actual surgical room. So like a metal table, the cult had dressed up as doctors and nurses with the scrubs and the masks. There's like a heart monitor. There's like all sorts of actual medical equipment. And they're using it to convince us, after drugging us and like strapping us down and torturing us, that they were actually putting in like a microchip or a bomb or cutting out our heart or cutting out our brain. And then they would show us like in a little jar someone's heart or someone's brain to convince us. But it's incredibly calculated, and they have obviously a lot of resources because they make so much money from the organized trafficking and from the pornography that they own buildings or they rent them, but lots of private buildings.
Oh my goodness. I think that too blows people's minds to hear that it's just in so many common places that we might even drive by every day, businesses or somebody's home. Like, you never know what's going on behind the scenes and who's complicit in all of this, which is terrifying to think about. And then to think about, how many kids that they put in these situations and how many families are going through this. And it's just really mind blowing. Were you alone a lot of the times during these abuses, or do you remember other children with you?
So Cult torture, when it's the formal rituals, that happens in a setting where there are multiple adults and multiple children. So there's at least 10 of us children where we're all being terrified by the ritualistic, like the wearing the cloaks and wearing masks and the chanting and the drumming and the torture and the mass sexual assault. But when they did the mind control, if it was what I call formal mind control, so it's very focused and it's one specific message that they're trying to give one specific personality, that was usually torture that was done alone with one cult member who was torturing us, or sometimes more, and occasionally sometimes they would bring in another child, but that was especially to make psychological torture to make us comply. Like when we, folks inside me, were resisting and resisting and resisting taking on the job that cult wanted us to do, then they would bring in a child and they would hurt the child the way that they were hurting me and say, if you don't comply, we're going to, kill this child or torture them even more. And they were saying, it's your fault, it's my fault that this child is being tortured because I did not comply. So that would always break me. I could not stand other kids or teens or adults being hurt, and hurt because of me, even though it wasn't really because of me. It sure felt like it because they were telling me that and because I was not complying.
And you brought up such a good point with how planned out not just the abuses and what they're going to do, but where they do it at, and the setups that they have can be extremely elaborate. And I think that's been, a very consistent thing between all survivor testimonies of this type of these, types of extreme abuse that you're talking about. It's stark raving mad, honestly, that adults get together and plan events. You hear about a satanic ritual, and there's adults that get together and they're planning out what they're going to wear. They're planning out who's going to say what they're going to do to the child. And it's basically like a play that's already set up. And the only person that doesn't know that it's a play is, the child or the victims that they're choosing. And I think that that's just a really, interesting part of all this is the psychopathy behind these adults, that they're literally getting together and planning these sets and planning the environments, even planning, well, if Cheryl is disobedient, we have another kid over here that we're going to bring out and use. Like, they even have backups for your responses, and they're already steps ahead of where you might go in preparation of you disobeying or disagreeing or not being compliant. And it's just really, it's frightening just to think about the calculatedness, but behind all of this. And, like I said, the psychopathy behind these adults doing this, that all of this is to frighten a child to create the dissociation, that they're putting all of this weird effort, into passing down these sort of ritualized sets and locations and places and types of people that they have there. And it's, it never ceases to amaze me, just the depravity that they're willing to go through, and the time and energy and money spent on each of these different locations that they curate just to simply frighten a child.
But it's not simply to frighten us. It is to control us and to make sure that we will never talk, because they don't want anyone to stop them ever, because they don't want to stop gaining the money and the power, but also an influence, but also their enjoyment of it, because they do get a twisted enjoyment of it. So it is to keep us silent. It is to keep us from escaping. It is to keep us from remembering. It is incredibly aware of psychology and what will affect the child at each age. And we also, I think it's important to remember that they likely went through the same thing or very similar. Like, I know that my parents, my grandparents, my great-grandparents were all also tortured, sexually assaulted as children. I think they would have gone through less than me, though, because the cult is always, they were experimenting on us kids to see what would create the most extreme pain and the most extreme dissociation without actually killing a child. And some kids did die in that experimentation. But they were always experimenting to see if they could, what new techniques they could create, like EMDR, which is used in therapy to help so many survivors. Cult was using aspects of EMDR before EMDR was even created. And so for me to actually use that modality in therapy, I have to have my therapist like modify so many things so that it doesn't take me back to the torture, because cult was making sure that I would be in my body and notice what was happening to my body, notice the senses and naming them of like, can you taste the blood? Can you smell it? Can you feel it on you? They were figuring out what would create the biggest impact to control us, to make sure we wouldn't talk, to make sure we wouldn't remember, and to keep us splitting. It's very calculated. And I think money is a huge part of it, but also they enjoy it so much. Like, I could not understand ever how they could enjoy it, but they did. Like, they got off on it. It's something I never understood because I could feel the other kid's pain. I could feel my own, and I could think, why are you not like responding to like the screams, to the terror, to the grief, to the pain, other than to get off on it? But that's where they went.
Which is so horrifying also to think about, you know, the types of people. I always say, like, it's like there's two different species of humans and we all walk amongst each other. There's these psychopaths and there's people who have compassion and who have a heart, who can't fathom that they're standing next to a psychopath in a grocery store, working for one or going to church with one, you know. But the psychopaths, they're very aware of their surroundings, and just like a chameleon, they'll do anything to fit in, so nobody knows that they're lacking emotion. And you know, like you said, being able to tolerate the intolerable for money and for these really corrupt things that they're using children and otherwise for. And so for you, again, like you're living this dual life. On at night you're being taken to these places, or even during the day, to be abused, but you still have to live as a normal child and function in society. Before you got all your memories, what did you feel as a child? What did you feel your life was like growing up before realizing what was happening on the back end?
I had so much emotional pain and I didn't know why. I was so scared and I didn't know why. Some of these are signs that people could see of a torture survivor, of how incredibly compliant I was, how incredibly afraid I was of any form of authority, like not just police and doctors and nurses, which the cult taught us to be afraid of, but anyone in authority and any adult I was terrified of, and so completely compliant. I did not understand why I felt so much depression and even despair and exhaustion all the time. It didn't make sense to me, but I didn't know that I was up for hours and hours every night because I wasn't remembering, because that was the only way to survive, was to dissociate it and to have other folks inside be the ones to endure it for me. I had to be the one who would not remember in the everyday time to function. But I was so shy, so scared. And my only safety, before I understood that we were going inward into our inner lands, was books. That was my escape. I was always looking for kind, safe adults and hoping for them, because I would read about them in books and hoping that it really existed. And every time I would feel an adult, I would want to like glom onto them, because I didn't have that in any place, including at home, not even when my parents were pretending. My parents were so cold and calculated and controlling and cruel. And I did not feel connected to them at all. And I felt guilty for it, because I thought, well, I should like my parents. I should feel like connected to them, but I didn't. And I did not understand why until I started remembering what they were doing.
And like I said in the intro, you had glimpses earlier than some people do of what was going on, even if you didn't have the full context, and you were writing about it. Can you talk a little bit about putting that on paper and the witness that you had that tried to step in and help?
So when I was 13, a part of me, because that's how we first were communicating with each other, by writing or by art, a part of me in class wrote a short story about being sexually abused. and my teacher actually listened. So the first teacher I told did not listen and did not take it to the police, and that's because she was the cult involved person in that school, and I didn't realize that's who I was disclosing to, but that meant she knew to take it back to the cult immediately and increase the torture and the mind control to try and silence me. It didn't work, because a few days later that part of me wrote that story, and a teacher who was not cult involved saw, believed, got the police involved, got the Children's Protective Services, so Children's Aid, involved. And I was so terrified I could not talk. I couldn't even say a word aloud to the police. I was so terrified because I did not know what was going on, but the parts of me knew that we would be killed. I would be killed if I talked. That is such a constant common threat in cult, is that they will kill us if we talk. And so I couldn't talk. I actually literally couldn't talk. And the detective was incredibly good with me, and she stuck around for a few years, but the Children's Protective Services, Children's Aid in Canada, was completely unaware of child abuse or especially cult torture. So to interview me, she had me in her car on the street, one house away from my parents. There's no way that I could possibly tell her anything that was happening sitting so close to my family. And that whole neighborhood, that whole street was all cult involved. And also, it would take quite a while for someone who is tortured every night and told that we're going to kill you if you talk, and we see actual murder, we see them murder other kids, we know they can do it. It takes a long time for us to trust enough to be able to actually say something. So I needed someone who was aware of what happens in cult torture, or even just really extreme abuse, to meet me multiple times away from my abusers and be able to slowly build the trust that I could actually tell her what was happening. That didn't happen. So I didn't get safe then. But it was the beginning, because that was me and folks inside opening up to me about the memories, and me actually being able to retain it, because they had told me many times throughout the years and I wasn't able to retain it. This time I was, because they did it in a public place at school, which meant that the teachers got involved, which means there was no way that I could forget that in everyday non-torture time.
Yes, and that was really conflicting.
Yeah, it was, and then the memories kept coming and coming. But I could only, at the beginning, remember my great uncle, because he wasn't living with us. He wasn't the one who's he couldn't kill me in my mind immediately by talking, because he wasn't the one I was living with every day and every night. My parents were the ones who could kill me. So I couldn't remember them for the first few years. And the police and the Children's Aid pressured my parents to get me a therapist, because there were so many really obvious signs of child abuse. And so they wanted to look like good parents. So they sent me to a therapist, but they sent me to a cult involved therapist who made sure to derail my healing, to as much as possible keep me from looking at more, who tried to shut down folks inside from listening to each other, and who did set off cues for programming within the session, and who also sexually assaulted me in her office. So just reinforcing it all, that there's no safe place, and to talk to someone, including a therapist, was not safe. And then also, of course, took everything that I actually was remembering back to the cult, so that they could use it at night in the mind control and in the torture to shut me down more.
Oh my goodness. And that's where victims are in this catch-22. Even if they do reach out for help, your teacher had the right response. Hey, let's go try to tell somebody, this child is showing signs of abuse. I'm going to tell somebody. And that had to have been such a glimmer for you, even though it ended up not working in your favor, just because, these cults are so, they mask themselves so well. They're so interconnected, and it's so easy for them to get away with crime, and to gaslight a child or to just cover it up. And so it's really hard for a child to even get help, even if they were to go shout from the rooftops, because like you said, the police could be involved potentially. In your case, your therapist that you were sent to, was involved. And so there's all these different ways that they keep the child still in the cult without them ever actually being heard, even though on the outside, it looks like all the proper steps and precautions are being taken.
Yes, and it is so incredibly common for the first therapist, at least, that a cult torture survivor sees to be cult involved, especially if it is chosen by the family.
Yes. And so if you're comfortable talking about this, and you don't have to go into, tons of memories, but I wanted to specify, when you do say cult torture, what types of tortures are they doing on you and other children that are raised in these environments?
Needle torture is incredibly common. So that is needles that are inserted under the fingernails, between the fingers, because these are places that even if there are slight marks, most people are not going to notice. Needles in all the orifices, so the ears, the nose, the mouth, the vagina, the anus, needles throughout the whole body. Hanging us by a rope or chain, tying our wrists together and hanging us, and then spinning us, which is part of spinning programming, so that we are so dizzy and disoriented we cannot focus, we cannot think. And that's when they start putting in the mind control messages. But it also hurts the joints and the limbs tremendously. Always sexual assault, but to an extreme, like over and over and over. Like some nights there were 50 men for hours and hours and hours. So it's extreme. We're ripped apart down there. And so I think I am just made of scar tissue down there, which does not stretch. Electroshock, and we're usually strapped down to torture tables or torture chairs for this. And electroshock, where they used electrodes, and it would be in many sensitive places. So the vaginal area, of course, and the chest, but even the mouth and the nose, all throughout anywhere that they could put it on the body. But there were times when they were experimenting on us, on me, on the body, with scientists, and I think it was military involvement, where they were taking me repeatedly to the point of death and then back again, because they were trying to create a psychic ability. I think they wanted to use it. Locking us up in small spaces. So especially coffins, because they were teaching us, it was part of a much larger abuse and torture scenario, where they would pretend to kill us, so torture us and use like a knife or whatever, and there'd be blood, but it would probably be a staged knife, but there was still pain. Tell us that we were dead. Drug us up so that there was paralyzation, where we could not move, and then do a fake funeral. So there were flowers, there was organ music, there were cult people crying, and saying things directly over the coffin about, oh, if only Cheryl had behaved and followed the rules, then they would be here. She would be, because it was she. Then she would be here today. And it's so sad that she couldn't just follow the rules, things like that. But sobbing, flowers, everything.
Gosh.
Then closing the coffin and burying us. That is terror. And by the time they dig us up, the drugs have worn off and I can move, and they're saying, you're reborn by the power of, and whatever it is, Satan or the cult itself or God, whatever they're saying. And we have brought you back. See, we hold control over your life and death, so you must obey. Like, so there's always mind control mixed in with any form of torture. It's rarely ever separate, because they want to reinforce the messages. So there were other small enclosed spaces too, like putting me in a cage and teaching parts of me that we were a dog or a cat or an animal who had to be on their hands and knees and would only be able to ingest whatever they put in front of us, which was always pieces of murdered victims. Forcing us to ingest murdered victims is also part of the torture. I think it's psychological torture. It feels unbearable, and we always wanted to die when that would happen. Forcing us to ingest our own blood and that of others. Forcing us to ingest things no one should have to. Blood, feces, urine, vomit, and pieces of murdered victims. Also spiders, other insects. Putting us in earth pits and covering us up with earth, but often dumping barrels of rats and mice or snakes or insects, especially maggots and spiders. So I think humans have a natural aversion to those things. And then when they are pouring them on us and they are telling us, like, whatever the message is, we're evil or we're dirty or there's, or that they are going to go inside of us because they are crawling into orifices and eat away at us unless we do whatever it is that the cult is saying, like, unless we obey the cult forever. Or even if we do, they're still going to eat away at everything because we are disgusting human beings. Like, whatever it is, like if they're saying we're disgusting human beings and it's going to eat away at us, they're trying to make sure that we are never going to trust anyone else, because if we're evil and we're being eaten away at, then we don't want to be around other people because they'll see that and they'll hate us more. And then there's also the psychological, like all the times that they were telling us we're evil, we're hated, we are hateable, that no one ever wants to talk to us, see us, be around us, touch us. And then there's the switch, and then they're torturing us and sexually assaulting us and hurting us, but there's never any kindness or compassion. So there's a lot of psychological torture, sexual torture, physical torture, spiritual torture too. If I did stop believing in God when I was a kid because I prayed and prayed and prayed to have God stop all the murder and the torture and keep the other kids safe and keep me safe too. And of course it never happened. But then they're telling me that, like, Satan was choosing to do this, or God was choosing to do this and making this happen or allowing this to happen. And so many times that they would reenact things from the Bible, especially putting me in the position of Jesus or other people. And it is so horrific and it is so messed up that it messed up my my ability to accept religion or God. And then when I was a teen and I knew that I was queer, then they also used that, especially in the trafficking, for the men who wanted to be able to turn me and make me heterosexual, which you cannot do. But so that was used, but there was also a God element, like, you're so depraved and evil for being lesbian that this is what you deserve. So there's so many aspects to the torture, and it's layered over and over and over. And then there's also if we have a uterus and we are born assigned female at birth, the forcing us to bear children, to be pregnant in the first place. I never ever wanted to be. I never wanted to bring a child into the world who would be tortured. I had no choice. This is one of the deepest soul wounds for me, and I didn't used to even be able to talk about it. But where they forced the pregnancy, forced the birth early, like I'm 13, 14, 15, and they are forcing the children to be born in the summer when no one would see, and early. And then I had the parts of me, the mother parts of me, had such an intense, strong bond for those babies and wanted to protect them and wanted to keep them safe. We were trying and fighting so hard to do it. Of course, we were tortured more. We were threatened with death. It didn't stop us. So then they threatened the baby, and that stops us. But it pulled us back for years because we wanted access to those children and we wanted to be able to save them, but we couldn't even save ourselves. Every adult that we knew was part of the cult torture for years, except for eventually our one good therapist. It was so hard to get safe, and we fought so hard to do it, and we fought so hard to protect our own children and other kids, and we couldn't. The cult used it. And so that is also psychological torture.
Oh my gosh, Cheryl. That's so young, 13, 14, to be going through this. How many times did they do this to you?
I don't know the total number, but it's more than 6. I did run away at 17, but they found me and were still torturing me every night. So, yeah.
Oh my goodness, I can't even fathom. I'm so sorry that happened to you. And again, like, this just shows some person off the street wouldn't know how to successfully not harm somebody by forcefully aborting a baby and then whether or not they keep the baby alive, that requires a lot of medical sophistication to be able to perform something like that, especially over and over and over again. And so again, you can see the organization with this, the resources and the knowledge that is being passed down as well. With this, it's not just, random people jumping out of an alleyway doing these things. This is like, it's very sophisticated, organized crime that is happening here.
Yes, incredibly organized.
And so at age 15, you had a slight breakthrough with having another person who witnessed you, a therapist you chose. Can you talk a little bit about that and what that did for you?
Yeah, I was so grateful. So I heard her because she was actually talking about being a survivor herself on the radio. And I went and called her, and she ended up being my therapist. And she is the one who, she immediately believed me about the torture. And then, like, the memories were getting worse and worse. I was remembering, it went from the child sexual abuse to really grotesque abuse and torture to then men and women in black cloaks. And when I got to that point, the cult therapist said, I cannot work with you anymore. And I'm so, like, I think she didn't want the blame of the cult because she couldn't shut me down. I'm so grateful that that happened, though, because I got this really good therapist who immediately knew that it was cult torture and also recognized our dissociative identity because she had gone through it all. And the belief, having someone believe you, because it sounds so crazy, and we're told by the cult that if we talk, of course we will be killed or it will kill someone else. But we're also told no one will believe us and they will think we're crazy, and they will either lock us up in like a psychiatric institution, which my parents did for a little while, or like put us in jail. And when we're kids, like, we believe that, but so it stays as like a belief system. And so it's terrifying to tell someone, and yet I was able to tell someone who gave me compassion and empathy, and that helps so much in healing. When someone is able to hear and believe and respond compassionately, it is like so much. All the torture, all the murder, all the mind control is happening in relationships and by people. So then to gain the extreme opposite, so much healing happens in that relationship when there is safety and trust, care. It feels like love, like unconditional love in a safe, contained way, and compassion and empathy. So much healing happens.
And man, that's so young to start remembering all of that. That's really rare too, that you hear of a teenager, especially in the more early teenage years, starting to have such massive programming breakdowns where you're remembering more of the deeper layers of what you went through, especially. How did that impact you in your quote unquote normal life? Like, I mean, you're still at school age dealing with things that put adults in bed, sometimes for years, going through reliving some of those flashbacks. How were you functioning going through that at such a young age?
With the dissociative identity. Like, I couldn't have functioned without it, with the dissociation. So I only knew what folks inside would show me in the flooding, in the memories. But I was having a really, really rough time. I did have a lot of suicidal ideation, but that is one of the programs that cult gives us, especially if they can see that we're starting to remember or talk. They teach us to hurt ourselves. So there's self-harm programming, and then suicidal ideation programming, where they don't actually want us to kill ourselves. They just want us to shut down enough that we will stop looking at the memories. And then there is further suicide programming where they would want us to kill ourselves, but it would only happen like with safeguards and codes when they feel like they can no longer use us. So I did have my first suicide attempt when I was a teen.
Oh my
And
gosh.
it's because I was still being tortured every day and every night, and remembering it and not safe. And what I really wanted in that attempt was safety. I didn't want to. I have lots of parts of me who think they really truly want to die, but what I wanted was safety. I just wanted to not be tortured anymore. And when I remembered that I was still being tortured, like by my parents, that's when I ran away. That first time, that was 17. And I thought I was getting safe by running away, but I didn't, because the cult creates self-reporting personalities. So personalities who are supposed to tell the cult everything that we're doing that breaks all the cult rules, so that we're remembering and exactly what we're remembering, if we're talking, and exactly who we're telling and what we're telling, and also if we are planning on escaping. And I was planning on escaping. So they knew that. So in the torture, they had someone inside look at a very specific shelter. So then when I, not knowing, because I'm not hearing the parts inside and I'm not remembering the torture, when I looked only like the specific things we'd already looked at, like it was my parents torturing me and it was cult. So when I was looking up shelters, I thought, oh, this one feels good because it was familiar. But the reason it was familiar is because the cult told us that's the shelter we were supposed to go to. And they wanted me to go to that shelter because there was a cult involved worker there who would take me every night, like open up the door to my parents every night, who would then take me for the torture. So I was never safe. I just thought I was getting safe. And that happened multiple times over the years where I thought I was safe and I still wasn't. The cult also chose my partner. They knew that they could not make me heterosexual. So they chose like a partner for me, and I didn't know that. So there would be the torture, and I would be being sexually assaulted and tortured. And then my partner, who I had never met before in everyday time, would come in and save me, stop the torture, stop the sexual assault. And there would be parts of me who went through that, her going, oh, like, you're saving me, and like feeling so safe and so grateful. And then I, who do not have those memories, meet her in everyday non-torture time, and I think, wow, I feel so safe. But the first 3 to 5 seconds of my intuition were, I don't like you, I don't trust you, I don't know why, but I don't trust you. And then it's overridden by the programming and by the personalities who are supposed to feel completely safe with her. And then the relationship builds, and then I am being taken back to the torture every night by her, and tortured and trafficked every day by her. So that happened multiple times until I was finally able to get safe.
Talk about that. How did you finally get safe?
That was a really long process of each of those times remembering and running away, cutting off contact with the abusers that I remembered. But in order to do that, with the dissociative identity, I had to be able to listen inside, increase the internal communication and cooperation. So everyone inside working together, so that I would not dissociate after they would tell us a memory. If I dissociate after they tell me a memory, then I'm not able to retain who the abusers are or what happened. And also we had to work on the programming, the mind control, to unravel some of it or to change the job inside so that those folks inside would not keep doing it, like for self-reporting parts or for suicidal ideation. So we had to do all of those. We had to be able to, that's how I got safe, is to look at the memories, be able to recognize who the abusers were, who we still had contact with in our life, be able to keep hold of those memories, which we could only do by the inner communication, inner cooperation, increasing it, and co-consciousness. So not losing time and working together to do all of that. And then actually cutting off the contact and remembering and getting safe. And so the last time where I know that I got safe, I had, again, a really good therapist. I've only had 3 really good therapists in my life. And this good therapist, she gave me so much compassion and empathy that I was able to look at the memories of that my partner was torturing me and trafficking me and sexually assaulting me. I was able to look at it. And then she wanted to save me. She wanted me to escape right away. And I knew that that wouldn't work. That had never worked in the past. So I had to work on it gradually. So keep awareness that I was still being tortured while I was being tortured, which is so horribly hard to do. And be able to make sure that folks inside would not dissociate more, that I wouldn't dissociate more, that I wouldn't lose this awareness and slowly get my own place, and seems civil enough so that she wouldn't know that I was remembering her, make sure that all the self-reporting parts were not telling the cult that I was remembering her, and get my own place and cut off contact completely. And keep working on the programming, always working on the programming.
It's amazing that anybody gets free from this when you think about all the different ways that they troubleshoot somebody leaving. Like, they're always 10 steps ahead of where you might be in all these different directions. And they have something in place already set up, whether it's a therapist, a partner. I mean, that had to have been so devastating to realize too, you finally, even though parts of you didn't feel safe because they knew, other parts of you were just grasping on, just wanting love, wanting somebody to take you in and make you feel safe. And you finally find that, and the ultimate betrayal, finding out that this person is just pretending they're sent to, coerce you and help manipulate your situation. So you go back into the cult. It's not a healthy love like what you have just been so desperately wanting. And you see again the calculatedness, the organization that goes into this, the planning. And like I said, it's incredible that anybody ends up finding ways to get out, especially, I mean, like I said, you're so young, trying to navigate all this and figure out, okay, this therapist at 15 years old mentioned dissociative identity disorder. What is that? Like, it's hard to find information on that now if you don't know where to look, to have to navigate that at age 15 and try to, what is that? What do I, now that I know that this is what I have, what do I do? Can you talk a little bit about your process in becoming more familiar with dissociation, dissociative identity disorder, and then ultimately how you created that cohesion inside where you had such good communication and could navigate different parts in their roles and sort of get to a place where you could end up getting away because a lot of those walls you were able to break down?
Well, I was really lucky to have that therapist who understood dissociative identity because she herself lived with dissociative identity. Like, that helped so much. So she helped me understand a lot. And she actually helped me have compassion and empathy for like the cult created folks inside. That was key also, because if we only look at how they are acting, like they are doing things that hurt us or that break down our confidence, our self-esteem, that are very cruel to us and that are based on our abusers and very specific jobs the cult's giving us. If we only look at how they're acting, we often start off with fear. And that's what I started with. But she helped me see that they were protectors, that I now know I could not have survived the torture without them, because the cult would not have stopped the torture until someone inside took on that job. And in fact, we had so many fragments of ourselves created and created and created who would then reject the job, and cult would discard them and have them say, like, you're over here and like you're not coming out into the system ever. And so they're just waiting for a new job, and sometimes they choose their own job now. But we would not have survived the torture if those folks inside who were cult created did not take on that job. So I owe them my compassion and empathy, because I wouldn't be alive. The whole system would not be alive without them. And in giving them compassion and empathy, that helps change them. So compassion and empathy, and then repeatedly challenging the cult lies that they were taught and the programming, the mind control, that helped them change. And that helped them actually want to change and to choose their own job, what they would do inside. And we call them tough guys, are some of our biggest protectors. And they had started out being what I call hard parts, like incredibly hard and mean to us and so cruel. And then they've changed over time because we gave them that compassion and empathy, and we were able to hear what they went through. Like, they had to tell me what they went through. So that was part of the process. Also, in the period where I was remembering and understanding that I was not only a cult torture survivor, but living with dissociative identity, there were a lot of conferences at that time, which later was shut down by the False Memory Syndrome Foundation, which is an organization of accused perpetrators of cult torture and child sexual abuse by their children. So they were perpetrators who were intentionally trying to discredit cult torture survivors by saying like satanic panic and like over and over and over many things. They were going after therapists. They were trying to sue them. They were trying to keep cult torture survivors isolated, alone, not believed by society, not believed by therapists, and not being able to get the help they needed. And I'm so lucky that I had this therapist who believed me, understood because she went through it, and helped me understand more about the programming and folks inside. So I read books, every book I could get my hands on, like Sybil, which does have problematic things in it, and Trudy Chase, like When the Rabbit Howls. There weren't a lot, but I read what I could, and I talked with my therapist, and I listened inside. And so in the beginning, I was losing so much time because I was still being tortured. And I could not hear folks inside all the time. But the more I practiced listening inward, the more I could hear them. And also, I hear them really strongly when they come out in my body because the voice changes and the opinions change and the way they talk changes and the way the body language changes. I hear it really strongly. So they often, if I'm not paying attention, they will come out in my body and say, Cheryl, like blah, 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 whatever it is that they want to tell me. And that makes me listen. But before that, especially when there were things that they needed to tell me that were really painful, like the trauma and torture memories, I would have them write it out and draw it out because it gave me some distance. And so they could still tell me and I could hear them, but it was a little bit farther away. My therapist at the time did try things like having me imagine that the memories were like through a telescope or like farther away or on a screen, but I couldn't do that at the time. But the writing and drawing it out worked. And it allowed many folks inside to have a voice who felt like they could not talk in my body because they were told that we would die. We would be killed if we talked. So it was our loophole that we found through the programming is writing isn't talking. Like we're taking it literally, and drawing isn't talking. And that allowed us to talk about the memories and the programming. But I have been working for years and years on the memories and the programming, and it started out only as fragments. And we were so dissociated and we were losing time, and folks inside were kept separate intentionally by the cult. And so it's over time, over working on this so much with the inner cooperation and inner communication and compassion and empathy and listening to folks inside, that it's just recently in the last, 5 years maybe, our memories now come as like a pretty full memory. So the sensory detail, but also like the whole of what happened. And that is because all these fragments that were kept separate are now working together to show me the memory. And there's less and less division and more internal cooperation and communication. And that is incredibly helpful. And it's also incredibly helpful to be able to hear folks inside and respond to them. And we have a rich inner world. The cult did create some structures inside, like things to hide some personalities or keep them separate from our self-created ones. But then our self-created ones, like we have these beautiful lands where folks inside are like, I have these kids who only exist on clouds, like they imagine floating on clouds in the sky, and like a blue sky with white fluffy clouds. That's our favorite kind of sky because it feels like our inner world where it's just safe, and it felt like it was way up above our body and our head, away from the torture. So kids exist in cloudland. Kids exist in rainbow land, where they slide down rainbows and slide up rainbows and make things out of rainbows and wear rainbow clothes. Oh, and the kids in the clouds wear cloud shirts and I guess they're onesies with clouds and blue sky. And then there's star kids who live in the stars and sit up in the stars. And all those were our safe lands away from all the torture. And yeah, those are nice places inside.
Do you mind if I show the photo of that you sent? Okay.
So there are kids in Starland. So they sit on the clouds, they live on the clouds. and they are happy and away from all the torture. And then there are robot kids who the cult also created, who are connecting with each other. And then there's kids in Cloudland and kids in Rainbow Land, and they're all connecting with each other. And kids who are part of nature. And we have fairies in there too. But so like they're all connecting with each other in the different lands.
It's such a happy photo. I love looking at this and just seeing the smiles and the collaboration. And this one's giving a heart. Like, look how cute this is right here. The two robots giving a heart. And this one's like down, just so happy sitting there that he's getting a heart. It's so cute.
I think giving the heart is symbolic of feeling because, okay, I think I'm going into a grotesque part of it again, but that cult creates robot personalities. And they do that through the abuse and torture scenarios where they are doing fake surgeries, where they tell us, like, so for these robots, I can, one of them has joints more, and so that would have been closer to an android robot that the cult was making personality, where they would pretend to cut off all of our limbs, our head, and at every single joint, and then pretend, so there's pain, and then pretend to bolt it together or sew it together at all the joints. And they would also pretend to cut out our heart and cut out our brain, and tell us that a robot or an android cannot think for themselves, cannot feel, and can only follow commands, because the cult wants to control us completely and have us be incredibly obedient. And so they were saying taking out our heart takes out our feelings, so we cannot feel. And taking out our brain is making sure that we cannot think, we can only follow commands. And then they would show us like a little tiny circuit board and say that they were putting that into our brain and cause pain, and there'd be the scalpel and everything and blood. And they would put in circuits, or pretend to put in circuits into our chest instead of the heart, and convince us. And then afterwards, there's always multiple times of the torture and the mind control to convince those personalities that they were actually robots. So here, one robot giving another robot a heart is saying, you can feel. You can feel. It's okay to feel.
Oh my gosh, that makes me want to cry. That's so precious. Oh my goodness. And look how happy too. It's just like such a sweet little moment that you were able to draw. Oh my goodness.
Because they want to be able to feel.
Yeah, that's so precious. Here's your heart back. It was never gone, but I'm giving it back to you.
Yeah.
Look at this sweet picture up in the rainbow. There's a rainbow. And then you can even see some of these more kind of faded parts that you have mixed into other structures that you drew, like a cloud. You see how happy everybody is.
Yeah, I love the inner cooperation.
Me too.
And we do have some really happy kids who have helped me throughout all the years when I go to places of despair and feeling like I can't get through and I don't want to get through. Then a happy kid will sometimes come into the body, or a playful kid, or a joyful kid, or a silly kid. And or even we have like artist kids and kids who write poetry who will just notice something. Like sometimes when I'm walking on the trail, I'll suddenly have a kid come out and I'm like, I hope there's no one around while we're talking out loud, but they're going, hello tree, hello flower, hello leaf. And I start looking at it and I think, but it is beautiful. Like, this tree is beautiful. Look at the bark. The leaf is beautiful. The bird that they're saying hi to, or the sky, it is really beautiful. And they help shift my mood.
That's so precious. Oh my goodness. I love how you've transformed such heinous horrors beyond comprehension into things that are making the world better. And you have no shortage of projects that you've worked on, whether it's just for fun, like your art, or whether it's things that you've actually published and put out. And I wanted to talk a little bit about your journey through healing, deciding to come forward in some type of a public way and share, and what inspired you to want to be an artist and an author, and sort of your journey getting into speaking out.
Writing and art were my voice when I felt like I did not have a voice, when the cult was telling us that they would kill us if we talked. So writing and art were my safe way to say things that we could not say otherwise. It was my way to get around the programming. And I was so shy and scared of saying anything because of all the threats that I would either be speaking in such a quiet voice people couldn't hear me, or so fast that people could not understand me. I was so terrified all the time. So writing and art were my way to communicate and actually be heard. And I didn't take it seriously in terms of getting published until I think I was in my 30s, when I took a course on writing for children, when I was training to be an editor. And I'm so glad I took that course, because that got me into thinking I actually can get a book published. Because when I was a kid and a teen, I didn't imagine being an adult. I didn't think I would live to be an adult. I didn't think there was any future. So we never dreamed of something like that. But when we started taking it seriously, I knew that it would be a way to be heard, but also to help other survivors, like Scars. How it has helped teens stop cutting, adults too, get into therapy, talk to someone for the first time about being queer, or their child sexual abuse, or their self-harm, or even keep from killing themselves. Like, that matters so much to me, and it feels like a huge part of why I'm here and why I want to be here. To help other survivors, to help people who've been through the same or similar things that I have. So that matters so much to me. And I actually have a book sitting with publishers right now about cult torture, about this, the book that is the strongest of my soul and my experience, cult torture and DID. And I'm really hoping it'll get published, because I think it could help so many survivors, and even the therapists who work with us, understand from like an insider perspective. And it does talk about many of the things I talk about in my videos that sometimes some survivors have a hard time saying out loud, or saying to anyone else, or even admitting to themselves. So I hope it'll get published.
Oh my gosh, I do too. But for people who don't want to wait just for that, you do have other books that are currently out that people can get a start on until we have the new one out. Can you talk about your current books that are already out in circulation?
So Scars, that's the one that has saved many lives. It's got my own arm on the cover, as you mentioned. It is about Kendra, who was sexually abused as a child, and she needs to face her past and stop hurting herself before it's too late. This is the book that has the most of my experience already that is out there right now. And there is actually in the crisis point in Scars, where I show the creation of a personality, or the coming forward of a personality, and mind control, where Kendra is being taught to cut herself, and it becomes a robot part who takes over. And that is actual mind control that happened to me. It was much more extreme and ongoing than I show in this book. Since I was taught to self-harm since I was like 2 or 3 years old, on cut off limbs of murdered victims first, and then later on my own arm, except that there were layers of silicone where they would teach us to cut. So self-harm is really important to me, because no one ever deserves to be hurt, including by ourselves. And I wanted to help people understand why someone might self-harm, and I showed like all the ways, including being taught. But I showed cutting to silence ourselves, to keep from talking, to keep from remembering, to shut down emotion, to shut down unbearable pain when it feels like we can't get through, and even to keep from killing ourselves. So that is my book that has the most of me in it. And then the next one would be Stained, which has a girl who was abducted, and she has to fight to get safe and fight to exist while she is being held captive. And that is also a part of my experience. Something that cult does is rent us out to people who can abduct us for a weekend, or for a week if it's a holiday. And I never knew if I would come out of that alive. So that is a piece of my experience too. And then Hunted, which is a paranormal fantasy, suspense, I guess, about Caitlin, who is a paranormal. So she has a paranormal talent. She's a telepath in a world where you can be killed or abducted, held captive by the state for being a paranormal. And for me, this was an analogy of cult, of how we are held captive and how we are hated and how even our family can be a part of it and continue it. And then Visions, where Kate, who is queer, well, a lot of my characters are, or there are queer characters in the world because there are not enough books for queer readers. So Kate sees psychic visions of people in danger that she might be able to help, but she only sees it when she has an asthma attack, which means when she has visions of her sister in danger and her love interest sister in danger, she feels like she has to trigger more asthma attacks to see the visions to be able to help them. But she has to find a way to save them and not kill herself. So in all of my books, there are really strong survivors who have to save themselves, because that's what I had to do over and over and over, was save myself.
Absolutely incredible. And where can people find your books if they want to purchase them?
So sadly, the publisher for Scars and Hunted went under. I am hoping to get them republished at some point, but the audiobook is available still for Scars. And the audio recorder did a fantastic job. So you can still get the audiobook and support me as an author. If you don't care about that and you just want to read the book, then it is still available in libraries, and you can still find used copies online at places like Abe Books or Thrift Books. Same thing with Hunted, except it was not made into an audiobook. Stained is available print and audiobook, and so for the audiobooks, any place that you would buy an audiobook. And then Visions, it's also available anywhere online where you can buy like an ebook, a print book. It is not an audiobook.
And can people get these on your website?
Yes, there are links on my website. Thank you. That makes it easier.
Yay! I'm going to bring that up. So Cheryl's website, you guys can find down below in the show notes or on any of her social media, which I'll also have in the show notes, but it's CherylRainfield.com. And she has a books tab that has them all. And again, you might not be able to get the versions of the ones that she mentioned, but you can go on, read about them, and you guys can, follow her journey and follow her social media for whenever they're back on and in print again. That way you guys can go actually purchase them. But all the rest of your books are available from your website, right, Cheryl?
Yes, and you can still even get the audiobook at least of Scars.
Wonderful. Perfect. And while we're on your website, do you want to talk a little bit about the rest of it? Because you have a lot of goodies. You have book goodies, but you have a lot of other goodies here on your website also.
I've written articles to help other survivors and the therapists who work with us on cult torture, on mind control, on DID. So they're all there. I do want to write some more. And there's ones also, of course, on self-harm, self-care, different forms of healing. And there's also an article I wrote on signs and symptoms of a cult torture survivor. So it's about 10, 11 pages of very specific. So I start out general for signs and symptoms of like child sexual abuse and physical abuse and psychological abuse, but then I get very specific into signs and symptoms you may see in a cult torture survivor. And you wouldn't have like every single symptom for every cult torture survivor, but there would be many, or there would be overlaps. And for some things, like many of us, there would be either a draw to or a repulsion to. So like graveyards, there are cult torture survivors who have a draw to. I personally have a revulsion to because of the torture that was done. Sirens, which are used in the mind control. Many of us have an aversion to or a fear to, but some are pulled to it. Same thing with like police and authority figures. Many of us are scared of them, but some people are drawn to them who are survivors. So all of that is listed in that article. And yes, the reasons not to hurt yourself and the reasons not to kill yourself are really important. And those are things that helped me stop self-harming and helped me not unalive ourselves. So they have helped other survivors and some of my readers, and I'm really glad for that.
Me too, and I appreciate you putting this together. I think it can be really overwhelming for survivors to sort of know where to start and to find information that can help them in those moments. Because obviously, if you're triggered or if a program sets off where you want to self-harm, you're in a moment, you don't have time necessarily to prep for that. It can happen just sort of at the drop of a dime. So I really appreciate you putting this together so people can have this as a resource. They can look it over, they can feel prepared for when and if something does happen, and help to understand more of their system and what these programs are there for. That way they can even prepare for situations like speaking out or, going to therapy where something may be triggered. So I really appreciate you putting all this together, because it's a big problem. We have a lot more people waking up that don't really know about the things that they went through. They just know that they're overwhelmed with grief and sadness and devastation, realizing what their life was. And I think that's all of our fear, that, yay, people get free, but oh my gosh, people are harming themselves because they don't know. They want to go tell people and speak out and don't know some of the side effects that can happen. So I think this is just such an important topic. And I really appreciate you putting things together to help therapists, to help survivors, to help support, spouses and people in a survivor's life. That way we can all get better at supporting survivors as they're going through remembering, and we can help them do it in a way where they can be safe throughout it, whether it's from themselves or other things, that they could possibly do, like reporting and stuff like that you talked about. I think it's just so important to have these resources. Thank you for putting them on your website.
Thank you. Thank you. And also in the links section, I link to organizations that help survivors, cult torture survivors, specifically DID. So there are some online groups that folks can check out. I especially like survivorship.org and ra-info.org, who are run by cult torture survivors. And there are some really good podcasts for DID. And I need to add your podcast for cult torture. It helps so much to hear from other survivors and other DID systems, to know that we're not alone in our pain. Like, that always helps reduce pain. I think it does. And I also have found that healing can happen so much faster and on such a deeper level if we're able to hear from other survivors and actually connect with or talk to other survivors. So it helps to have those resources.
Man, and look at all these topics that you cover too. You really have everything on here for people. And I also appreciate you talking about some of these more sort of taboo topics that I don't think get associated often with survivors that go through torture. And I think some of it, like you said, can be uncomfortable for even survivors to talk about, whether it's their deeper parts that can have the cult loyalty and have a specific way about them that can be off-putting, for them to be able to understand that and to realize that these aren't demonic forces within you. This is part of you that, like you said, saved your life. And I also appreciate the LGBTQIA references, articles, and education that you do. A lot of survivors that I know have obviously parts that are all different genders, all different sexualities, all different sexual preferences. And it's also a topic, I think, that gets very separated from survivors and can be very uncomfortable sometimes for survivors to talk about in an open environment. So I really appreciate you giving these different demographics and pain points in survivors a safe space to be heard and to have a normalized conversation about, because I think, like I said, with more people waking up, like, we really do have to make a lot of these things more comfortable. We have to be more open, and the goal should always be to help heal and facilitate support and comfort and love and compassion for survivors. And that really starts with understanding the things that they went through and the side effects of that, and understanding, parts and all of their roles and all of their preferences and the things that they were trained to do, and helping facilitate a survivor through creating that cohesion, like you said, and helping helping a survivor be able to navigate with DID instead of just pushing everything back down because of shame and guilt and things surrounding some of these harder topics.
Thank you. It's so important to me because I'm queer, right? I'm a non-binary lesbian, and I identify, and my system collectively identifies as non-binary, but then I have male parts who do not and hate that they are in a assigned female at birth body. And it's having to respect everyone inside with their gender identity because they exist and they helped us get through the torture. It's so important to have respect for them. And the queer community faces marginalization and oppression. Women do, of course, Black, Brown, Indigenous people do, but survivors can have multiple forms of oppression on top of the actual cult torture. And then I never felt like I completely fit in any of the communities, or I didn't used to. Because in the queer community, well, I'm also DID, and I have all the cult torture, which is so extreme. And then in the cult torture community, at times it felt like there wasn't room for the being queer. And that has gotten so much better over the years, and now it does feel like there is. And then in the DID community, again, it didn't used to feel like there was a great space or overlap for being queer, and sometimes for the cult torture. So I have many overlaps that I want people to know that they're not alone in, and that they can embrace, and that there's nothing wrong with any of them. We just need to be able to talk about them.
100%. Yes. And like I said, I love that you cover all of that on your website, and I'm going to have that below for everybody. And I wanted to see, before we start wrapping up and going through your social media, did you want to bring up some of your art that you were going to share today, and we can just kind of go through it, and you can share as much or as little as you want?
Yes, let's just let people know first that some of the art is graphic, so I already have been talking about details, and if you can handle the details, you may be able to handle the graphicness. But there is some art where I'm showing programming, so mind control that was being done, and mind control is always done in conjunction with torture and sexual assault.
Okay, so a trigger warning from Cheryl. If you don't think you guys are ready for visuals, you can either look away and just listen if you feel like you could handle what she has to say and the visual might be triggering, or you guys can come back whenever you're ready. But if it's okay with you, Cheryl, I'll bring up the first piece of art that you sent, and then we can.
So this one was a self-portrait that I made, I think, when the body was a teen. I was trying to show the fear that we were always in and the pain.
And you really illustrated that. You can see in your eyes and the circles under the eyes and just the dark coloring. It looks like, somebody tried to just suck the soul out of you, suck the heart out of you, and you're just looking so desperately for it. You really captured representation of that, grief feeling and just that emptiness.
Thank you. That is what it felt like. You said that so beautifully.
And I'll go to this one.
So this, I was showing programming. For me, that was the other mother who was torturing me. So a form of electroshock, because I think it's like a cattle prod. And there are also the needles I was talking about that they put into our body. A tool that's being shoved into our vaginal area and being hung. And the whole time, so there's physical torture, and then the whole time there are messages that she is trying to force us to accept, that personality to accept. So saying, teaching that personality, what do you do if anyone inside tries to remember? And we already know the answer. That part knows the answer because they've been told. So squash them, suppress them, confuse them, hurt them. That's their job. And the other mother is saying that, I don't believe you. You don't have enough emotion in your voice to convince me. And it so increases the torture. And then that personality has to prove that they absolutely will do the job and are completely wedded to the job and give the emotion in it. And the torture will increase and increase and increase until that personality convinces her that they will do the job that they were given. So stop folks inside from remembering or talking.
That's so harrowing, but it's so consistent with what you hear from so many survivors. There's that it's never enough, though they're going to do what they do, and just keep pushing you to just keep repeating and saying these same things, but it's never enough for them. You know, you could say it all you want, and it's always going to be this manipulation that they have to say afterwards.
Because they want to make sure that that personality will do the job.
Yes.
And then here again, this is programming to teach a personality that they do want to hurt themselves, hurt the body, and that is their job. So that again is the other mother. She did a lot of the mind control for me and the torture, all the cult did torture. But so she's saying, right, tell me like you mean it, come on, I don't hear you. And that personality is having to say, I like to hurt myself with emotion, while there is at the same time visuals that we are being forced to see, words, but also images to bring that personality back to that moment to do the job that they're being taught to actually hurt the self. And there are cuts on the arm and the leg as the other mother actually cuts us, but then we are taught to do that later on ourselves. So it is an association of pain and torture with the message and with the job that is being created for that personality.
And you see that you're locked down. You can see that there's electricity and there's different clamps and there's nowhere for you to go. And you think about if an adult was in that position and it happens, you hear about these war crimes and the prisoners that end up becoming, you know, prisoners of war in a sense, where they get tortured by the government, and it's these same exact tactics, and they're doing them on children, and they can get adults to do whatever they want by doing these things to them. So it's like a small child to do this to, of course the child is going to try to comply as much as possible. I mean, anybody would, you know. And so you empathize so much with this little child and this part just going through this and realizing that they don't have anywhere to go. Like, that's all that they can do is just agree to what this abuser wants them to do and say.
Yes. And then again, if we did not, they would torture another child. And this one I did as a teenager when I was just remembering, I think, the child sexual abuse, and some of the other memories were starting to come at me, but I didn't know about the torture and the cult torture. So it was more metaphorical of how it felt like we were tied up and having had the sexual assault and trying to hide it, and the constant pain, and also the despair and the depression. And yeah, it was more metaphorical.
And you can really feel that in that one, even with the colors that you used to create that emotion behind it. And then with the head down and everything too, it's like, I just want to go reach through and go hug that part.
Thank you. And this one is some of our DID. That is a wise part of us above, who is very compassionate as well. And then there are many kids inside who she's helping, and even a dolphin. Like, we do have personalities who are not human, like the cult created, like the robots, for instance, and others that were not human. And then we created like butterflies and even trees inside, and dolphins, like things that felt either hopeful or calm or healing. So we have many folks inside, and some of them cannot talk on the outside if they come into our body, like a dolphin or a dog.
This picture just feels so nurturing to me and so sweet. And again, it has like the happy elements of parts that are holding hands and looking happy and up with clouds and playing with dolphins. And it's just very sweet. This is a really amazing way to show something that you've experienced and sort of give that comfort to people who are onlookers to this.
Thank you.
And so I'm going to take this down. And do you have your art on social media also? Do you present your art on your website or social media or anywhere that people can go see more of your artwork?
Sometimes in some of my videos. And I think I also have an Instagram that has some art that's just for art. And there's a drawing that I did also of multiplicity that I had wanted to show, but I did not send it. But it's in my manuscript.
So we can bring it up.
I don't think it shows that well, but it's my
Oh,
DID.
wow. It shows well enough. And you can even see the butterfly and the different ages that are in here, and some are clothed, some aren't, the different positions. That's incredible how it makes up a whole facial structure and top of the body.
And there's even tough guys in there and wise parts and a tree woman. And it feels like with all the dissociative identity, with so many folks inside, it does feel like that they are so crammed into my body that there's nowhere to go, that everyone is there, always in the mind and the body.
And what a way you have to show that and to be able to bring that to life. I think dissociation too, and for somebody who is not DID, to comprehend and to just try to imagine what that's like if you don't deal with voices and you don't have places inside that you retreat to or have had to go to survive, or even just to keep safe or to protect, and I think the artwork is a really key component to helping the outside world, especially people that help survivors like therapists and spouses, and keep people on a survivor's journey, for them to just have a conceptualization of what that's like. And the artwork is just such a really, really neat and helpful way to do that. And it's so expressive and emotional too to look at.
Yeah, thank you. I do think art can show things in a way that we can't always say in words. Like, I think story can, and then art can.
And I love your passion for both of them. It's amazing how many books you've written and how you just keep going. And I'm really excited for your next book to come out and hope that it gets the publication and the attention that it needs. And I'm happy it'll have more of your testimony too. Is that one by chance, is that one also a fiction, or is that one a nonfiction?
It's fiction. It's, again, young adult, but it has so much from my life in it. It's called Escape the Night.
I'm so excited. And so for people who want to keep up with you, you are very active on social media. You actually share a lot of your testimony on social media too, just in small little tidbits, and short videos that are really easy to share and to sort of take in and digest, because some of the stuff can be heavy. Can you share a little bit about where you're at online and anything that you want to share about your social media platforms? And I'll bring them up as you talk about them.
Thank you. I'm on TikTok. I was on that first with videos. At first, I was scared to talk on video, and now I do. So TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, Facebook, and now Substack as well. I talk.
That's exciting regularly. That you're on Substack.
Ah, thank you. I didn't used to be. It's new. I talk regularly about cult torture and details of it. That I want survivors to know that they're not crazy the way cult tells us we are, and that they can believe their memories. So I do talk in a detailed way about it. I also want people to understand, the general public to understand, that these things truly happen. So, and I want therapists who may have clients who might not be able to say some of the things I can say. I want them to be able to learn from me. So I talk about cult torture in detail and mind control in detail and why the cult does some of the things that they do. And I also talk about dissociative identity, both the self-created and the cult-created personalities. And I talk about those regularly. And sometimes I also talk about books and art.
And you're also on YouTube. You publish a lot of your short videos on there also, and you have playlists that people can check out, and obviously links and things like that. Is there anything that you want to share about your YouTube, or anything else that you plan on doing with it?
I think everything that I post, I do post the longer videos there too on YouTube. And so TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube have been the most active with people responding. And I so appreciate that people do, that people engage. It helps me want to continue.
And it's neat. I was going through your videos here on YouTube and just scrolled all the way back, and I couldn't believe how many years you've been doing it. But you see sort of the progression of you more being author and talking about that part of your life. And then you see the slow integration of more talking about parts of your story and like really putting that out there. And then sort of the transition into making a lot of what you went through the basis of why you're doing this to begin with. And like you just really standing in your power, owning your testimony. It's really neat to just watch that. I noticed that especially here on YouTube as I was going back. And I'm like, dang, she's been on YouTube for a long time sharing these videos.
I have. I didn't used to think that I could talk about the cult torture and the dissociative identity as an author because I did not want publishers to think that they couldn't work with me. There is so much ableism about dissociative identity. And then talking about cult torture and the details that I do, I have always written about it. I have had articles on my website for so many years, and I would speak at conferences, and my art would be in newsletters and even newspapers, and a circulating art from survivors, like cult torture survivors, show. So I have been speaking out since I was a teen, even at conferences. But doing it on social media felt like I do not like public speaking. I will do it because I have to as an author. And then I now do it because I want survivors to know they're not alone. And I want people to start believing and hearing us survivors so that survivors can get safe sooner. And so that maybe some of this will stop sooner. So I gradually started doing it on social media as well as the articles, which were much safer because it's not speaking publicly. But I enjoyed doing it now, although some days when I'm having a hard day, it does feel like a weight. When it's a really hard time of year and I'm struggling. But the rest of the time, it feels like something that is so important to me that I know makes change, because survivors have told me in private messages and in comments that they had never heard anyone else talk about this until they heard it from me, or that they were able to take a video to their therapist to talk about what they can't talk about. And that means so much to me. Or all the people who are finally starting to hear cult torture survivors, I think because of the Epstein files, they're actually starting to hear us and believe us. And I am so grateful for that. And I want it to be grounded in the whole context of this is organized cult torture. And this happens even in your neighborhood, even if you are not aware of it. And that it is not just something that happens in other countries, which is where people like to go. They like to think it's another country than their own. And I want people to believe and to care. And eventually that will make slow change. And that's what I want to see happen. I want survivors to get safe sooner than I did.
And before we wrap up, for survivors listening who are struggling, who are maybe thinking about making that first step to speak out, but they have the same fears that you do, for the survivor that's, wondering if they're going to be able to live another day because they just have so much grief, what would you say to our community being where you are today?
You are not alone. You have survived so much already. And you will keep getting through even when it doesn't feel like you can. But it's so important to find your safe people, to trust your gut, and to find at least one person who you can talk to and trust and who accepts all of you. And it can feel impossible in the beginning. Like, I will never find someone who loves me or accepts me or who can hear me, because so many people cannot or do not want to. And so many people are also ableist and do not accept the whole DID. But once you find one person, that can be a lifeline. And for me, for so much of my life, for most of my life, that person was a good therapist, was one good person that helped me get through. So there are good therapists out there. There are good people who have compassion and empathy and will hear us and will believe us. And if you are able to reach out to the survivor community or the DID community, and you can find people who you may even just listen to by video, or who you can connect with as a friend, I think our healing advances so much faster and on such a deeper level when we know we're not alone, when we understand that there's other survivors who've been through the exact same or such similar things, even across countries, even across continents. There's so much healing that can happen. And there are some really good resources out there that can help you through it. One of the books I recommend the most to other cult torture survivors is Becoming Yourself by Alison Miller. There is so much wisdom in that book. And there's so much talking about the survivor system, the DID system as a whole, but also is addressing programming and the things that happen in cult torture. And I also recommend Safe Passage to Healing by Christine Oksana. There's also a lot of good detail there. So there are resources, there are online groups, there are people who will believe you and hear you.
Amen to that. And I know that that just touched so many people's hearts hearing that from you, and you're living proof of it. So for anybody, that needs to see a miracle, they need to look no further than you, and to know that anybody who's struggling can get through it and find that light on the other side, just like Cheryl did. So Cheryl, thank you so much for coming on today. It's such an honor to have you on and to finally get to connect with you and to share you with my wonderful audience. I really appreciate you coming on today.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you for hearing me.
It's an honor to get to witness you. And for everybody listening, again, go in the show notes. I'm going to have all of Cheryl's links. She sent some really helpful articles and different things as well to put down there. So it'll be a whole resourceful show notes that you guys can go down and just click, and it will take you right to her recommended links as well as her own links. Please connect with her on social media. It's a really easy and free way that you guys can support survivors. If you guys have money that you'd like to spend, I would love if you went and bought her books as either a gift to yourself or others. A lot of you reach out wondering where you guys can donate to, and I always say go right to survivors and support their projects, support their books, help them continue doing what they're doing, whether it's buying equipment or writing another book or getting a flight to go to a speaking engagement. It's really important that we help resource them. So if you guys do have money that you want to donate or have the financial means to support, go purchase her books and share them with others and share them on your social media. So you guys, we couldn't do this without you. You guys are the backbone of all of this. Without you guys, we would just be speaking into the void. So thank you guys so much for supporting, and thank you guys for being here today. We will see you next time.